It's here in the council chambers and also all of you that are watching on the city's YouTube channel. A couple things before we do introductions. First of all, I'm Don Zadiba, General Manager in Indian Wells Valley Water District. A couple of things, if you didn't notice, there's a table outside the door with a couple of things on there. Sign-in sheets. If you're interested in getting updates from the Water District, please put your information, your contact information down there, and we'll add you to the list. And there's also a frequently asked questions sheet related to the comprehensive adjudication that you may find of value, so feel free to pick those up as well. One thing for the people that are watching on the YouTube channel, if you want to call in with a comment, a question, or the way to do that, please call 760-499-5010. Again, that's 760-499-5010. The phone line will only allow one caller at a time. So if the line is busy, please continue to dial. We will be allowing about 20 to 30 second pause between callers to give time for media delays and callers to dial in. One important thing, if you do call in, please mute your streaming device so we don't get feedback. We've had that happen before. It's not very pleasant. So please do that. If you wish to comment on more than one item, please call back for each item. Again, the number to call, 760-499-5010. So real briefly, I'm just going to do some introductions and then turn it over to Paul. First of all, we're honored to have Paul Goslin. Paul is the Deputy Director for the SIGMA program with the Department of Water Resources. Sitting over here, you already met Lisa. Lisa is with Stantec. She's a lead facilitator. And Stantec is a company that is contracted with the Department of Water Resources to do the facilitation services. So Lisa will be presenting first. To your left, my right, the far left is our district's legal counsel, Jim Worth. Jim has been the legal counsel for the district for many, many years. His firm is McMurtry, Hartsock, Worth, and St. Lawrence. Seated next to Jim is Doug Everett. Doug is special counsel of the Water District. He's with the firm of Murphy and Everett. And they're going to make a brief presentation before we turn it over to Lisa. So at this point, I think Paul wanted to make some comments. So we'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you all. I guess I have to talk into the mic for the home audience, I guess. So thank you all. I am Paul Goslin. I'm Deputy Director of the Department of Water Resources over the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office. And later, I'm going to give an overview of our responsibilities, how we review plans, and a summary of that, and we'll have an opportunity to have questions and answers. But I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to come up here today. I've known Don for a number of years. We've gotten to know each other and started, one of the projects was the AEM, the Airborne Electromagnetic Method, is some of the pilot projects that led to the state doing it statewide. So, real good friend and colleague up here. So it's good to finally get a chance to come up here. But I do want to recognize that SIGMA does create a lot of challenges locally on achieving sustainability, and I recognize that. Before I came to the department 10 months ago, I've only been in this position since last July. Before then, I was managing Butte County's water department, and we had 3 subbasins implementing SIGMA. So from a local agency perspective, I really feel and understand what goes into trying to develop these plans, implement them, and work with a variety of different opinions and stakeholders that oftentimes are not going to reach consensus, and there's going to be disagreements. And that's happened in this basin, and it's happened in a number of other basins. Unfortunately, it's somewhat, sometimes those things will need to play out, but, what we were hoping to do, and Director Nemeth last July was sent a letter out trying to encourage people to, kind of hopefully get together and start talking together, and try to work out disagreements amicably. Sometimes disagreements may need to go through the courts, and sometimes that's a needed process, but really dialogue among community members is really where it's at. So we're real fortunate to have the facilitation get kicked off here in a public setting here tonight. I know from my own experience using facilitation when I was with the county in 3 different subbasins, enormously helpful to have a professional, neutral party to listen, understand, help digest different perspectives, and it really, I've found, helps guide some paths and maybe build some bridges and understandings and maybe remove some of the testy spots, but also lead to some areas that you can have good, frank discussions on. So with that, I just want to, again, thank you all for having me here tonight and you all coming out on your busy evening and joining us here tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Green light is it's on, very good. All right, I've reached that. I have to put my glasses on to read the agenda, but I'll go ahead and do that. So first of all, we just wanted to do a general overview. We're going to hear about the context. I know that the litigation is something that many of you have been wondering how this relates to other things that are going on, so we've asked the attorneys to make a few comments about that. Then we're going to go over and describe what it is that's going to happen with the facilitation services, kind of what's going to happen, what the steps are, what you can expect, and how we're going to interact with the public on that so that you can remain informed. We're going to open it up for questions and answers, so you can ask questions about the work plan or anything else that we've got planned. Then Paul is going to come back and talk a little bit about the evaluation of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. So as all of you know, under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, under SGMA, everyone was required, all the subbasins were required to prepare a Groundwater Sustainability Plan. That's essentially what brought us here. And there's been a lot of questions in the community about how that decision was made and what went into it and what is going to happen next. So I know that's something that you're going to be able to talk about. So from there, we'll open it up again for questions and answers, and then our goal will be to get you out of here at a reasonable time so that you can get back to the other things that you've got to do. So that's what we've had planned for this evening. Was there anybody that was expecting something different or was hoping that something else would be covered? All right, seeing none, I'll go ahead then and move into the rest of the agenda. Thank you again for being here. Let me move to the dais and ask our representatives here to talk a little bit about the context. Gentlemen? The slides, okay, they've got, so Don is attempting to teach me forward. That way? Am I going the right way? There we go. All right, I can't see it. I'm looking in the, okay. It worked. All right, one more. Thank you. There. I was joking with them about they picked the gray slide for the attorneys to talk. All the rest of them have color on them. So, okay, gentlemen.
With that introduction, thank you, Lisa. Again, Doug and I were requested to provide a brief overview of how we really got here tonight. Some of what we're going to talk about, some of you are more familiar with, you've been following it, others maybe not, so I'm going to provide a brief overview. So any discussion of the current water situation should begin with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which became effective on January 1st, 2015. SGMA requires local agencies with water management or land use planning responsibilities to form a groundwater sustainability agency and then to prepare a groundwater sustainability plan, which goal is to implement the plan in certain implementation actions that are intended to bring the basin, the Indian Wells Valley Basin, into sustainability by the year 2040. For purposes briefly stated, sustainability means the development and implementation of measures to ensure the management and use of groundwater does not result in undesirable results, which are, for purposes of the basin, these are the 4 that are critical: chronic lowering of groundwater levels, significant and unreasonable degraded water quality, significant and unreasonable reduction of groundwater storage, and significant and unreasonable land subsidence that substantially interferes with surface land uses. So we're trying to avoid those 4 factors as we're moving forward managing the basin. The Indian Wells Valley Basin is classified as a high priority, critically overdrafted basin by DWR and is designated as basin number 6-54 in DWR bulletin number 118. Now, pursuant to SGMA, the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority was formed, and it consists of the counties of Kern, San Bernardino, Inyo, the city of Ridgecrest, and the Indian Wells Valley Water District. As required, the GA, I'll call them GA tonight, they prepared and timely submitted the GSP to DWR on January 31st, 2020. It has subsequently been reviewed and approved by DWR, and the effect of that approval, I believe Mr. Gosselin will go into a little bit more later on in the night. So for purposes of tonight, the central conclusions reached by the GSP are that the safe yield of the basin is approximately 7,650 acre-feet annually, and that the remaining usable groundwater in storage is less than 2 million acre-feet. For perspective, right now, the basin, overall pumping basin, is somewhere in the neighborhood of around 25,000 acre-feet. So we are pumping more than is coming into the basin, and that's the concern. As a result of these numbers, the GA has imposed what is called the replenishment fee. And the replenishment fee, it's an amount of, the replenishment fee is charged on every acre-foot of water that is pumped over the 7,650 acre-feet. So from the perspective, the district pays about $4.25 million a year to the GA for the replenishment fee. And again, it's intended to purchase imported water supplies to augment the only source that we have, which is groundwater. Now, the submission of the GSP to DWR and the resulting implementation actions proposed, they've resulted in the filing of multiple lawsuits, I believe 7 to date, challenging the GSP, the implementation actions, and some of them also requesting a court declaration binding water rights for everybody in the valley. As a result of all of the lawsuits and everything that was going on, the Water District made the decision to file a comprehensive adjudication, which Doug will discuss later. But the intent is to bring long-term certainty as well as to achieve a final and binding court determination of water rights in the basin. Now, this is something that the GA lacks the authority to do. The only person that can determine water rights is a judge, and therefore that's why we filed the adjudication. So with the GSP in front of DWR and all of the multiple lawsuits that were going on July 16th, DWR sent a letter to the major pumper stakeholders in the basin offering facilitation support to bring the stakeholders together to address the challenges facing the basin with SGMA, GSP, and the related lawsuits. The Groundwater Authority was intended to be the lead agency for the DWR facilitation, but for reasons the GA can speak to, they declined DWR's offer. Fortunately, DWR did not stop there. They contacted the district to see if the district was interested in taking over as the lead agency and trying to move the facilitation process forward. Much to the reluctance of legal counsel, the board of directors of the Water District instructed staff to work with DWR and Stantec to see if we were able to go ahead and make the facilitation work. Now, the facilitation services that are offered by DWR, they're specific. I believe there's 9 categories, and it took a couple months for us to work with DWR and, quite frankly, primarily Stantec near the end, and we were able to jointly prepare a work plan, which I believe Lisa's going to talk to later on in the process. So they asked who should be the initial entities on the planning committee, and the district recognizes that all of the residents and pumpers in the Indian Wells Valley Basin are impacted by the GSP and these related lawsuits. So we recommended that the process start with the major pumpers, which would be the Water District, the Navy, Searles Valley, Mojave Pistachio, and Meadowbrook. They've all indicated an intent to actively participate in the DWR facilitation process. Other stakeholders within the basin will be part of a DWR or Stantec assessment that's going to take place after this after the public meeting, and presumably as we move forward with the DWR facilitation process, the other stakeholders will be brought more actively into this process. So the last thing I want to say is a couple goals that I believe the district board is trying to accomplish through this facilitation, and that is to provide a venue for the Indian Well Valley Basin pumpers, stakeholders, and the public to re-engage with one another and to work collaboratively to develop solutions to the challenges facing the basin. The district also believes that this facilitation process may help resolve some of the lawsuits that are pending. Resolving the lawsuits is of primary importance to the district because we are, in essence, the water district is in essence funding either the defense or prosecution of every single lawsuit that the GA is involved with through payment of the replenishment fee, which is, as I've indicated, over $4 million a year. So those are the two goals that we hope to accomplish. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I've just been asked to speak for just a couple of minutes about the adjudication and why it was filed, and then I'll be turning it back over to Lisa and Paul. The fundamental question that a number of people have asked are really two questions, and that is, why did the district file the adjudication? What does the district hope to achieve? And for those folks that are here and listening online, why am I involved in this? Two primary reasons, and it's primarily what the GSP cannot do. And there are two things that the GSP cannot do. Number one, the GSP or the GA cannot determine water rights. Then maybe more specific to this valley is the GA cannot or does not have jurisdiction over the federal government. And as a result, there's only one way under law that the federal government is allowed to participate in matters determining water rights. And there's a federal statute known as the Mccarran Amendment. And I won't get wonky with this, but the bottom line is that Congress authorized the federal government to participate in water rights lawsuits if and only if there is a comprehensive adjudication binding upon all pumpers or water rights holders within a given watershed. So with that background, and because of that law, and because of the importance of the Navy in this process, the district moved forward with filing the comprehensive adjudication in compliance with the Mccarran Amendment, again to bring the federal government into the process with the ultimate goal of creating certainty through this process. At the end of the day, we intend to have a court judgment, and what comes out of that, the fancy word that they use in water rights cases, is a physical solution. A physical solution is primarily just a settlement among the water rights holders, or a settlement that the majority of the water rights holders will present to the court with the goal of imposing that upon all producers. A recent example of that where it's been successful is the Antelope Valley that you all know about. That adjudication did take a period of time. I'm expecting this process to move a lot faster because of laws that have been put into place in the last few years that provide for a streamlined, comprehensive adjudication process. But through the Antelope Valley adjudication, we did come up with a physical solution that was approved by the trial court that is being implemented now. The federal government participated in that, and we negotiated a settlement in that case that was approved by virtually 99% of the parties, including ag, domestic, municipal, and the federal government. So that's how we ended up here with the comprehensive adjudication. One last point is we do have our first court appearance, I shouldn't say first court appearance, but first significant court appearance this Friday. In the Orange County Superior Court, we have what's called a case management conference. Nothing of substance will occur on that particular point. The court will not be making any determination as to rights or affecting anybody's personal rights going forward. The primary purpose of this meeting on Friday will be to advise the court of where we are procedurally, where we are with serving the lawsuit, what parties are participating, and what the next steps are. And with that, I'll turn it back to Lisa and Paul.
Great, thank you so much. I'll go ahead now and talk a little bit about the facilitation process. And one of the things that was mentioned is there was quite a bit of conversation before we even entered the process. And I wanted to just explain that a little bit. As a facilitator, I'm a third party and I'm a neutral, which means that the thing that I am paying attention to is to the process itself, the actual process of the facilitation. It's very important that that be transparent, that everyone has a voice, and that the process is fair. So as we move into these kinds of conversations, sometimes, particularly when people are accustomed to working in more adversarial situations, that's a little bit where we have to kind of put some bookends on different things and say, yeah, we can do that, or we can't do that. So we'll always strive to be as transparent as possible about what's kind of on the table and what's off the table. You should always feel comfortable as a member of the public to ask questions about that, and we will be happy to make, again, the process as transparent as possible. So with that, I'm going to try to look at the slides and talk. All right, Don, this is the secret test. All right, here we go. All right, so this is a little bit about the facilitation support services and what's involved. You might have mentioned, or Jim mentioned, that there were different kinds of things that could be applied for. The very first thing that's on the list says stakeholder assessments. I had an opportunity to talk to some of you in the audience before we started the meeting, and one of the things that I heard was how important it was to look at the social and demographic context of what's happening here. So one of the very first things that we want to do is take a look at the community, what's going on here, how water impacts it, and to pull that together. And this is the very first thing on the list that we're going to be doing. Then there are other kinds of things we are helping right now in other basins. So Stantec, because we support the full program, we're working right now probably in about 26 sub-basins. I've personally worked in about 24 of them. So we have a lot of experience. And some of the things that we're helping people do is figure out what kind of a governance structure would make sense, particularly when there's more than one groundwater sustainability agency and they're working together and they're trying to figure out how they're going to do cost sharing and that kind of thing. So that's one of the services that are offered. We also do public outreach to help with public meetings, tribal engagement, and so on and so forth. You can see the meeting facilitation, interbasin coordination. These are all things that at some point may be a need that you have, but the most important thing for right now is to jump into the stakeholder assessment. So with that, this is what has happened is the district has convened a planning committee. We like to work with the community to figure out who it is that we're coming out. We want to do interviews with the community. We want to get a better understanding of what the context is. So a planning committee has been convened to help us do that. They'll sit down, help us plan the kind of questions that we should be asking, help us understand some of the information that we're hearing. Right now, we've asked them to help us with an interview list of people that will be going out and doing one-on-one interviews. So those are the kinds of things that the planning committee's been asked to do. They're also helping us plan these public meetings. So when we come out, they're helping us say these would be some things the community would be interested in hearing more about. And we'll be looking, now that we've had a chance to meet with you, we'll be looking for your input and your insight as well. So in our process, this is the work plan that we have right now. We have the process initiation. This was the first part of sitting down and sorting things out with the planning committee. The planning committee has a charter. That is something we're happy to share if you'd like to see that. I think, is it on the website, Dawn? I don't know if that's something we've got. If not, but we'll make that available if anybody. So it explains what the kind of the ground rules are and how that committee is going to work together. We'll be doing the stakeholder assessment. After we've completed the assessment, we're going to make the results of the assessment public. We'll be coming back and letting people know what happened. One of the things that we like to do in assessment, and Emily's helped me, Emily's the person you see here, she's my virtual facilitator. She's paying attention to what's happening online. But one of the things, I'm going to go ahead, that's our timing. So in the assessment, one of the things that we'll be, and I'll dive into this in a little bit, but one of the things that we will be doing is taking information. We do not call out people by name unless they specifically say that their comment wouldn't make sense. We like to bundle the information. We like to explain what a trend looks like. We really are try to be very thoughtful about the way that information is shared, and our goal is just to help set the stage. We really want to pay attention to, is there room for some positive outcome or some positive agreement? As mentioned, there's a lot of lawsuits going on. To the extent that we can find a jewel or something that will allow this process to move forward in a way that there is a lot of common ground, that's quite useful to the court, but it's also very useful to the community. Also, we're really appreciative of the fact that it's been a tough couple years, and people have been pitted against each other, and that's really hard on a community, especially a hard community, a small community. So we want to make sure that we have a chance to see if we can do a little bit of relationship rebuilding. So this is the time frame. We started in April with our planning committee, pulling people together, starting to get some names about who we might be interviewing. These are the people that are helping with the planning committee. You can see it's the district, Cereals, Meadowview, Meadowbrook, the Navy, and so on and so forth. One of the things that we've done is prepared this work plan. We've planned this public meeting, and we're coming out to you to let you know, and then we'll be starting the next stage after that. So from May to July, we're going to be doing 15 interviews. Some of these, most of them are going to be small groups. We're going to try to get as many people as possible. If you would like to be interviewed and you don't happen to be on the list, we will make the questions available to you, and we would still love your input. So even one of the things I've talked about, maybe coming out and spending a little bit of time in Trona, for example, and some of the other places. So if you don't get a personal chance to talk with us, but you'd like input, we will make sure that you have a chance to do that. So that will be happening over the next month or so. And the people that are going to be involved in that are the key Basin stakeholders. And then from that, we'll be doing the outcome and presentation of findings. And I think we've got a list. So these are the folks that have been preliminarily identified as being the people that we'll be talking to. And we've started developing a spreadsheet. Some of you will have a chance to meet Emily. Emily's the person on screen. She's the person that's going to be helping to organize a lot of that and the interviews and that kind of thing. And some of you I know have already met her because you've asked me where she's at. Okay, and then from July to December, we'll be taking the information that we've learned in that process and move into our committee meetings, public workshops. Right now, we're planning more public workshops where we focus on key content that we've learned in the process of working together and allow people from the community to help us compile that and figure out kind of what kinds of paths might be available to move forward. So we'll be in some ongoing conversations about that and really drilling down into the content, seeing what is possible. They will also have an opportunity to speak to the boards. So we'll be doing these kind of more public workshop kind of things where the public can be more engaged, roll up the sleeves, and then also an opportunity to meet with the board. So you have lots of opportunities to talk to us and provide input. Then we'll continue working with the Planning Committee and Basin stakeholders, and then we'll be coming forward with some recommendations based on what we've learned from all of you. It will not be our opinion. We will be compiling the information collectively that have come from the group that appears to present paths forward. So this is just a simple outline of what the timeline looks like. And so what is the stakeholder assessment? So moving down, you can see what we're trying to do here is evaluate the needs in the context of a community, and we're trying to find out how it relates to you and your community to really minimize risk. And right now with water, I know a lot of you are really feeling a lot of pressure with this. By the way, these slides will be available to you, so you're welcome to copy them down, but we'll also make them available to you. We're going to be conducting this internal and external scan. I talked a little bit about that, kind of looking at some of the demographics. We'll be looking at the technical and non-technical risks. So one of the things that's going on in this particular location is you do have some disputes about the actual technical information. And so that's a technical risk. And then you also have some risk associated with how different things might be implemented. So we want to make sure that we address that in part of that process. We're going to be digging in and try to understand that a little better. Then we'll be determining also the best way to engage, which means, is it a public workshop? Do we need to do more interviews? Whatever that is, we'll be coming up with a good process to make sure that that community voice is still present. Then the next thing we'll be doing, we're trying to, once again, get this opinion leader information. We're trying to find out who potential partners might be. So this is in this investigation process, and we're going out and we're taking a look at project opportunities. So who is a potential co-funder who might want to step up to the table to make different parts of the process work? And especially in water, this is really important. That we have a lot of complexities where there can be trade-offs and that kind of thing. So we'll be looking for those opportunities. We want to understand the regulatory and political context, and that's going to be a big one. Those of you who are familiar with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act know that when you are not in compliance, there can be some very severe consequences from the state board and from other regulatory agencies. So we'll be paying a lot of attention to that and making sure that we keep this community on course. And so on. We'll be looking at attitudes, knowledge. These are just the kinds of things that we're looking at when we're doing an assessment. So these are the kinds of questions that we'll be asking. These questions, again, we will make this public, and if you, for some reason, are not a person interviewed, you'll be most welcome to provide answers to the questions. But we'll be asking questions about what's being proposed in terms of projects, in terms of process, those types of things. We want to get a better understanding for what's on the table right now. We want to understand who all the stakeholders are. So you're all in the room, you're obviously stakeholders, but there might be some other people who don't have representatives here. We want to understand who those people are. We also want to understand the timing, and I think timing for this community is going to be extremely important, and when different kinds of things will happen, why it's important to the community, the methods that are going to be used to accomplish your outcomes. And one of the things that you'll notice from the assessment questions, none of these are yes or no questions. These are all things that require a story, and the story of your community and how that builds together. So the benefit, one of the things that we've learned is if you talk to the stakeholders before you jump in, you're probably going to get a better outcome. And I think that's probably the quick summary of this particular slide. I'm suspecting everybody in this room would have a story to tell about that. And the other thing I think that's been interesting, a lot of times when we come into a process, people say, well, we don't have time to do that. We're just too rushed. We've got too many things going on. And I think one of the things I always want to say to a community is you don't have time to not do it. You don't have time to do it over again, and you don't have time to do it wrong. So if we can do it right the first time, that's probably going to save you time. But it's counterintuitive, especially when especially with Sigma. Remember, there were all these dates, and everyone felt very pressured, and we've got to rush, and it just didn't feel like we had time or the ability to have the kinds of conversations that we wanted to have. Okay, so when I find out who the stakeholders are, this is how we find out. We ask questions about who they are, what they care about, who do they listen to? Are there people in the community that are trusted that we can rely on to share messages? So we want to find that out. We want to know the best way to connect with people so we can have conversations, particularly communities that aren't able to come out to meetings every night. And we want to know the best way to talk to them. One of the things that we learned, I think, Paul, this would be true for your old job. We had farmers tell us, do not talk to me in May. This is not, do not do that. So there are times when it's important, when the community is able to have capacity to do things to support them. Okay, and I said we've got a lot of facilitator stuff in here. I think I'm going to just kind of zip through it a little bit faster. This is the kind of thing, once again, when I look at how we determine who should be in the room. You already saw the list that the committee put together. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. I'm trying to do that. Thank you. All right. So once we do the assessment, that helps us pull together the scope, and the scope will help us determine what it is that goes into the rest of the negotiation or the collaborative process. I'm going to just blast through all of these again. So we're looking at the whys. We're looking at some potential outcomes. One of them might be joint fact-finding. This is something that, again, particularly when you have a disagreement about data, a lot of times we found that you can use a joint fact-finding process that would allow you to sit down and crawl through some of the information and come up with some better outcomes. We do think that may be a possibility in this particular sub-basin or basin because of some of the modeling disputes. So we'll be looking at that. We'll also be looking, we've already talked about the internal and external scan. Okay, and at the end of the day, the goal is to get to yes, just to find a way to find the common ground, even if it's only 50% or 60% or whatever that common ground is, to move that ball just a little bit down the field so you have a better community outcome. And so that's basically that on this side. And
So for questions, I think the way you want to do this was rotate between people present and people that are listening in. So
yeah,
for those of you that are present, since it's being recorded, we need to have you come up and speak into the microphone. And if you just state your name for the record. And then the same thing, if you call in, please state your name, but we'll let you know when to cue you when you're live. So anybody that wants to ask a question, please move over to the podium here. And
yeah.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'm Don Decker. The one thing that you guys haven't mentioned is the public engagement that exists already through the PAC and TAC committees. And the members of those committees have put in thousands of hours at this point attempting to engage both the board and the public that they represent. I'm on the TAC representing domestic well owners. The well owners have a domestic well owners association that many have joined in an informal sort of way, and we have been in contact with a great majority of domestic well owners. We are not a legal representation for them, but we're providing more of an information transfer. That aspect is especially important here because the great majority of wells and pumpers in this basin are private wells. The impacts that are being felt are mostly by those well owners. Declining water levels means ultimately drying out wells. So my point is that your engagement, you can start fresh, obviously, but the more you can take advantage of the TAC and PAC members, the further along you will be in a short order. Many of the public that is involved is struggling to understand the progress that's been made, and it's both technical and political. And that's an area that the domestic well owners has attempted to address with some level of imperfection, I might add. Not everyone is at a point when they start off where they can take the next step. The process has indeed gone along very quickly for many people. And so the education part of this whole thing remains a critical and to some extent unmet requirement. So I think that's what I've got to say to you. The 800 some odd private well owners are the ones with the greatest impact. Your list of stakeholders includes the domestic well owners, but in terms of the population here, that by far is the most important one. The major pumpers, of course, have a bigger financial stake in a sense, but overall the domestic well owner stake is huge also. Don't forget the domestic well owners.
Thank you. That's really good advice. And we fully intend to take advantage of the knowledge that's already been incorporated, and definitely intend to spend some time talking to the domestic well owners in terms of this process. So,
well, I'm sure you were, and thank you for saying that. I'm simply pointing out that the TAC and PAC committees are already well up on the curve, and you can learn a lot from them.
yeah, that's really good advice. I also appreciated what you just said about education and how it's important to kind of bring everybody along. So there's people who've been very engaged, and then there's folks that haven't. So that's a really helpful insight. Thank you.
Well, the PAC, the Policy Advisory Committee, has spent a huge amount of time putting together a communication plan that was for the benefit of the board. And you undoubtedly have heard of it, and you should pay attention to it, because it does in fact address the very issue we're talking about. But having a plan is one thing, and actually implementing it is quite another.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. I may have some more things to offer to you later.
I would appreciate that, and we do intend to reach out to you. So thank you.
Yes, I'm sure you do. The core of the PAC and TAC, many of those members have been involved in water for a very long time, and actually understand the problems right to their core.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a caller, so
Yeah,
caller?
please.
Want to put him through?
Hello?
Hi.
Yes, you're live. Please speak. Please state your name.
Penelope Lapome?
Could you repeat? We can barely hear you.
Penelope Lapome.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Penelope.
Hi, I have been following this issue somewhat peripherally, and I was wondering, how do we contact you, or if Emily is the contact, how do we contact her? With names of, like, trusted messengers, I can think of a few, including TAC and PAC.
Great. Well, we will have that information available for contact, and then I think what we want to do is get some things up on the website so that you have a way of following up on that. There's also a frequently asked questions chart, and I do believe there is some contact information on that. So if you let anybody at the district know, you can contact us. There'll be information on the website and from the PowerPoint. So all of those things will be appropriate, and we would definitely appreciate hearing from you and the information that you have to share.
And whose website? Is that the Water District or the GA? Or
It'll be the Water District website. They're the ones hosting this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joshua Nugent, Mojave Pistachios, and I just really wanted to come up here and say thank you to the Department of Water Resources for being here, so it's very nice to see you. Thank you to Stantec for being here. We appreciate your guys' facilitation, but most importantly, thank you to the Water District. So we've long felt that the Water District is closest to the ratepayers and closest to water management, and so to me, they are the natural leader in this situation, and so we're excited that the facilitation process is including the major stakeholders as well as pretty much everyone in the entire basin. My dad and I are here today, and we had a chance to drive around the valley today. We got to see our trees. We got to see the town of Kern. We drove through Ridgecrest, and it's a great valley. We love it. We want to be a part of the community, and we want to be a part of the solution. So we really appreciate this process, and super excited to see everybody here. So it's nice to have a packed house, because this is an issue that's going to affect all of us for a long time.
Could you have Dad wave so I can see Dad? There, okay.
Hey, Dad.
Hi, Dad.
Thank you.
And
Okay,
anybody
I
else
don't think we
online?
have a caller, so
Okay, please,
Next up.
go ahead.
Yes, my name is Judy Decker, and yes, I'm attached to the other Decker. I am the Vice President of the Eastern Kern County Resource Conservation District Board. I don't believe you have our name on the list, but we represent all of the landowners that live in this valley who live within Kern County. And we are very tuned in to the water situation. I'm also vice chair of the PAC. And for me personally, I used to be on the water board. So we have been heavily involved in water. Our conservation district stresses conservation of water, the use of very low drought tolerant plants. We have a plant sale every year, and we have lectures. So I do hope you put our name on the list. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll offer a comment also that we have found the resource conservation districts to be incredibly helpful in most of the subbasins that we're working in. So I appreciate you just making mention of that. Thank you.
Lisa, I think
Yes.
we are bundled with one of our identified stakeholders.
Great, great, very good. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
My name's Regina Troglin. Most in the audience actually know who I am. For the gentleman who doesn't know me, I am the Trona representative on the PAC committee. And it took us quite a bit to get to that point to have somebody be able to speak for that town, which is kind of disappointing. But I have a more pointed question directly for you two. DWR was aware quite a substantial amount of time ago that there was a problem with communication, with information, misinformation, et cetera, within the community. Why did it take so long to get to this point for those of us who aren't familiar with this process?
Okay. Do you want to take that now, or do you want to? Sure. I will let him answer that.
Probably to quick end, the future is now, no time like the present, but really I think one of the fundamental pieces of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and I'm going to speak to this a little bit more in detail later, is local control. And it's different than other state laws. And I was involved as a county manager when it was being developed and fought real hard for local control, local discretion, and not having the state, whose hat I wear now, sort of manage and dictate from the top down. So part of it is locals being willing to take this on. So that was part of the delay. I think things were obviously starting to escalate, which prompted the director last July to write a letter to encourage facilitation, which we have found to work very well in a lot of basins. As Lisa pointed out, the process does work, and I can attest from personal experience that it does work and can really help smooth a lot of disagreements out. But again, it took some time to engage, and ultimately the water district decided to take this on. They were eligible. Our services are provided to any local public agency that's eligible to be a groundwater sustainability agency, which the water district is. The groundwater agency was interested and then declined, so that took some time. And then it did take some time once the water district was engaged, as Don explained and Lisa explained. It took some time to sort out, okay, how is this going to get structured and worked? I mean, I was ready to launch and have a public meeting and air it all out, and it was sort of like, no. Everyone was like, no, we need to sort out a game plan first, which made a heck of a lot of sense, which also pointed out why Sacramento doesn't need to get too deeply involved in local issues, but provide resources and support for locals. So it was just once that process got going, the committee got going to kind of structure this to the point where we're at now. So, I think we're in a real good spot. I think the process, stakeholder engagement, as you'll find, is going to be a real valuable process and tool, and ultimately start developing things that I think, hopefully will be enlightening and help improve the dialogue locally. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Next.
Hello.
Hi.
My name's Tyler Montoya. I'm a citizen of Ridgecrest. So I have some notes I want to read. So as citizens and taxpayers, we know that the GSA plan was a poor plan, and we're really curious on why the DWR would approve such a poor plan.
I'm gonna just interrupt for just a sec, because I am gonna have Paul talk and go over that. Did you have and I'll have you first back up when we do that. Did you have a question about the kind of game plan that we're doing with any of the facilitation or anything like that?
I do have a question. In the GSP, the action plan doesn't specify how we are going to restore the basin level. There is a lot of funding requested. It almost seems like to construct a plan, and that doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem fiscally responsible. So as citizens, we want to know where our money is going and why so much is being requested with no result.
Okay, so it sounds like the part that you're interested in then is a way of making some of this information more transparent and helping people understand the reasoning and the logic.
Yes,
Yeah.
and and the technical part, we understand that our basin is in need, and we understand that we do live in the desert, but we want to know what our money is going to, how that is going to restore the level.
Yeah, thanks. That's definitely on the plate, and I know you're not the only one because I've had other people in the audience tell me the same thing. So,
Okay.
But feel free if you want to sit towards the front, and if you have more questions after Paul talks, feel free to come
Okay,
back
thank
up.
you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Oh, and thank you for coming also.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Please. Hi. Come on down.
My name is Sophia Merck. I was noticing on your stakeholders that there is no mention of water haulers.
Ah,
And
yeah.
I've been a water hauler for 35, 38 years, still hauling water when my truck works. And again, I want to thank you guys from DWR for coming down here. I know it's a long ways, but this community really needs to come together. And we all need to work together. And I'm glad to hear about the transparency, especially about the financial. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do want you to know, we have water haulers on our list. I think what we were looking at, I'm looking here at my committee, but we have them bundled into a group, right?
With the water district.
With-
They're the supplier.
With the water district. So I want to flag that. And Emily, I know you're doing, there is a person named Emily who's online. I swear you can see her name. But Emily, if you could take a note of that, just so that we circle back on that. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Shirley Kirkpatrick. I've been to many of the groundwater meetings, usually in the morning, since Gleason was started this several years ago. You're not familiar with that. I don't know if you know who Gleason is, but I don't want to talk too much about in our valley what the plans are. I just want to talk about the politics. And one of my concerns is which is called NGOs. Are you familiar with what an NGO is? Are you involved with the NGO?
So I'm an independent third party. I work with NGOs all the time. So
okay, so you work with Water Education Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, for those who don't know, the Water Education Foundation was, if you know, do you know Jennifer Bowles?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, she works for UNESCO. You're familiar with that? Mm-hmm. So what it is, UNESCO is a part of the United Nations. So the 2030 plan, was it 2040, I don't remember, was a plan for you to have this in place because Jerry Brown attended these meetings to put this in place. And I noticed that you were in the meeting in 2016, you had that tour, and you were a keynote speaker for MW Global. So that was associated with the UNESCO. So UNESCO, in case anybody doesn't know, their plan is to...
I'm going to just interrupt because I actually am not sure what you're referring to. Is that something you can show me that I can see?
You go online to your Water Education Foundation, which you're very well, you're familiar with that.
We know who the Water Education Foundation is.
Jennifer Bowles, that's how you say her name?
Mm-hmm.
She is actually the executive director of that.
Right, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and so she spoke for climate change in UNESCO. UNESCO was actually put in place by Julian Huxley, who wants to take away sovereignty to, nations. So the whole point I'm trying to make is that the sustainability thing, when Jerry Brown came back from Rio and got all this together, we started this thing. So whatever's going on in this valley, there's more to it than that. So what we've basically done is we turned over our authority in our valley to your NGOs, like such as yourself. In order to be an NGO, you must abide by United Nations you have to follow
Okay.
their rules.
Yeah, we'll cover that, because I think there's a misunderstanding.
I don't think so,
Yeah.
because it's a fact that Jerry Brown had went to Rio and the United Nations and came back and implemented the Sustainability Act. So that's not, it's out there. I mean, go look at the Los Angeles Times or any newspaper, it's out there.
Right, yeah.
So what I just wanted to point out, because you did mention that you work for Stantec, so.
Yes, yeah, so that's an engineering firm.
Right, and on
That's-
March 15th, you had it's mentioned here on the Public Education Foundation that you had a meeting on March 15th to learn to be a facilitation support service, to bring questions about the GSA implementation, engagement with varied beneficial users, and managing conversation with people with different opinions. So that must have been a pretty good, interesting meeting. Well, that's all I want to say, because there's more to it than just our valley. I'm working with some other people with other ideas on how to fix our problem, and it has nothing to do with, the sustainability stuff like that. But I just want to say my piece, because there's more to it, that we're losing our sovereignty, and if we keep letting Sacramento get involved in our water, we're going to lose our sovereignty in our little valley here. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, do you want to respond, or you wait, or
I'll-
just kind of?
I'll cover that in my presentation, and then you'll have a chance
Yeah.
to Q&A on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Wes Katzenstein. I'm a member also of the Policy Advisory Committee, or the PAC, domestic well owner. And I have a couple concerns. First of all, I sense that if you guys are successful here, you hope to perhaps take some kind of an agreement to the adjudication. I can't understand what other effects you could have on the future of the basin.
We, just as a point of order, we don't make any decisions. That's all a decision that would be made by the people here in this community. We're just here to facilitate a conversation. Whatever an outcome comes from this is something that the community would decide, not us.
But then that outcome would presumably be available to the adjudication process?
A transparent process would be available to any observer.
Yeah, it seems to me that once you have a technical basis, you know how much water there is, and you know where it's coming from. Once you know that, and once you've established water rights, which I guess that's the purpose of the adjudication, everything else pretty much falls into place, I think. And it's going to be tough in this basin because we are overdrafted about 3.5 to 1. So it makes me a little bit nervous when we sort of imply that the technical reality of the basin is something we all kind of generate through some agreement here. And I want to remind everybody that the Navy has spent a lot of money putting together a comprehensive groundwater model of this basin, and that groundwater model has been calibrated in the sense that if you go back 50 years and put in the data from that point in time, you can predict where we are here today. So I worry a little bit that if the technical foundation becomes something that we kind of agree upon, or it's some kind of an average of people's opinions, that may set us off in a direction that really won't work for this basin. So I just want to share that concern.
That's a really fair comment. Let me just untangle it just for a second. So I see this actually somewhat regularly when you do water quality kinds of issues. The facts are the facts. So whatever they are is what they are. And that's not something that really is subject to anybody's opinion. You don't vote on them. The thing that the public or the stakeholder community has the ability to respond to is the way you're going to manage what those facts are. So what are the collective decisions that you might as a community make that will allow you to live within the context of whatever the facts are? So it's a little bit of a nuance, but I think it's important relative to what you just said, because I'm not a fan of voting on facts. I think we need to just go with best available science.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. So anybody else? I know you're probably dying to hear from Paul. He's a lot more interesting than the facilitator. So
We shall see.
Okay. All right. Anything else we want to make sure? And I'll be here after. If you have more questions, please feel free to do that. Okay. Well, looks like, sir, did you have something?
I guess I can get up and make a fool out of myself. My name's Ralph Lockenmeyer. I'm just a city dweller here. My big concern is I can sell my house in the next 10, 15 years, or my son can when I kick the bucket. But I do have a few questions. I don't know all the details of what's been going on, but my understanding is we put a lot of money into making plans to import water. One of my concerns is, with all the droughts, if we build a pipeline to who knows where to import water, how much would we have gotten from that, this year? Would we have gotten, what, 5%? Is that what they're allotting? You got any answer on that?
Your question is a lot more complicated than what you might think it is. So there are a whole bunch of things that go into the answer to the question. We would be happy to answer that, though, maybe after this session. But essentially it has to do with where it's coming from and what the water rights are and who can transfer. And so it's not a simple answer.
For somebody like me who hadn't really been involved, it just seems like one of the questions, would we be building a pipeline to nowhere?
Yeah.
So that's kind of my first question. Let's see. You've been involved with the settlement in other places, I guess. Is it realistic that we can get the $200 or $300 or $400 million we need to build a pipeline to wherever? Somebody going to pay for that for us? Are grants reasonable, or are we just flailing in the wind? Have you seen any grants like this go out?
So I can only speak to process. I can't speak to
I think
content.
you're talking about, and a lot of this all gets down to, the implementation of the groundwater sustainability plan by the GA. They'll have to do feasibility studies, which gets to the point about if there's a other source of water, what the reliability of that, what the cost is, that's part of the feasibility study. And then they'll be looking at funding and other sort of things. And so I think some of the discussion that will come out of this stakeholder assessment and other information and committees, that will all be part of the discussion.
So you haven't been involved in anything where they've done what we're trying to do?
I think there's been facilitation in other basins looking at both governance, plan development, GSP development through a facilitated process. That has been done where they've looked and decided on, the agency got the basin setting, the facts together, and then looked at projects, implementation actions with the community.
Has anybody else gotten a $300 million grant to build a pipeline?
I don't know.
Yes. There are grants that have gone out from the Water Commission for a variety of either conveyance or storage options. Mm-hmm. But it actually, I hate to sound so bureaucratic, it's not a simple question, but there are funds that are available for some kinds of infrastructure that you have a specific amount you're asking about. I couldn't speak to that, but it's not unreasonable that money is available for certain types of infrastructure.
And including now, federal infrastructure dollars are available. There's bonding. Municipal bonds are used for large infrastructure projects. So there's a range of different funding mechanisms. I'm talking just generally on large projects. So it depends on the project and what sources of funding and funding mechanisms they come up with.
Okay. It seems to me reasonable, at least I'm trying to do this, cut back on my water usage because the water price has gone up so much. And I think if we build a $200, $300, million pipeline, it'll go up some more. What happens if everybody's like me and says, I don't want to pay for that? And so we don't need to import anything. Nobody wants to pay for it. So we have a dry pipeline. Anybody else ever have this kind of a problem? Do people always step up and pay for all that expensive water?
So I'm going to observe, you're asking really excellent questions, and those are questions that would be the subject of some of the conversations we're going to have. I'm not in any position to answer what this community might do. What we're here for
I'm interested
is-
in what other people have done, other
Yeah.
settlements like this. Have they had this problem where everybody just stopped using the water? I mean, if you look at the water usage around here, it's pretty reasonable that if everybody like me quit landscaping so damn much, that the town could get along fine on the 7,000 some acre feet of water.
So that's something that should be on the table, right? That would be something that you might actually bring into a conversation where the community could talk about whether or not that's a realistic option. So what's happening right this second is you're offering some ideas that are really worth discussing. And those are things that if we're in a conversation with the community, say, what are your options? What kinds of things might you be looking at? How might you decide that you'd like to move forward? Those would all be things that would come onto the table, and the group and the community could decide if it made sense for them to do that. But that really wouldn't be up to us. There are other communities that certainly have made dramatic conservation moves. Those are realistic things that have happened in other communities. And in fact, the California population has grown tremendously, and we've not actually had an increase in per capita water use. So all the things that you're thinking about are absolutely on point. It's just not something we're talking about this evening, but it is something that should be on the table for a community conversation. Did you have any questions about the actual facilitation or any of that you'd like to bring up?
I didn't understand you.
So did you have anything about what we're going to do next, the facilitation or the way we're going to move forward? Did you have any questions about that?
No, in fact, I kind of feel you're late to the party. This has been going on for 5 or 7 or 10 years. I don't know. And all this kind of stuff has been mulled over and upside down and backwards. So, but
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for taking the time. It looks like we have one more person, and then.
Hello, my name is Margaret Graham, and I'm interested in what's going on. And I've heard a lot of the big stakeholders talking, but I just want to make sure that you include all of the citizens in your decisions and your group discussions, and that they can give their opinion too, not just the major stakeholders.
Okay.
And that's all I wanted to say.
Super. Well, thank you. We definitely will make the questions available that we're asking so that you can provide input.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. All right. You ready
Am I
to
up?
talk
All
about DWR?
So I'm going to stand so everyone can see me, and I've been sitting all day, so this will get my blood flowing.
And you'll have
Do
to
you want
be like
to-
me and try to use your microphone.
I know. Do you want me to,
Apparently, you want to try two?
No, I mean,
Yes. Little pointer thingy.
this will
That's a
keep me on
technical term, the
track.
pointer thingy.
Is it just the arrows?
Yeah. So,
Wrong one.
there we go.
There we go. So thank you again. I'm going to give a brief overview of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and our role at the Department of Water Resources, and specifically my Office of Sustainable Groundwater Management, and sort of the process and how we reviewed plans and next steps, what happens after a plan is approved. So real quickly, where does SGMA apply? And this was something that was really grappled with, and it was decided to have it apply in the high and medium priority basins throughout the state. And it was an established basin process through what's called Bulletin 118. And these were established basins. And when it was done, it was recognized that, these really didn't fit a lot of purposes for SGMA, so there was a process to modify basins, and some basin modifications occurred. But at the end, there were 94 basins that are subject to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. 21 of those are critically overdrafted, so they had to submit plans by 2020 and implement by 2040. The rest of the basins had to submit in 2022, last January, which they did. There's also a process for low and very low priority basins. If they want to voluntarily submit plans, they can do so. And we've had a number, I think there were 4 that did submit plans voluntarily on their own. So as part of the process, that was explained earlier, who manages these basins to achieve sustainability, and it's Groundwater Sustainability Agency. So the law created a whole new slurry of acronyms. The way government does, you get a new law and you'll get a whole bunch of new acronyms. So GSAs were the ones, and it was any agency that has water supply, water management, or land use. So that's public agencies. It's public agencies, water districts, irrigation districts, municipalities, counties, typically made up groundwater sustainability agencies. Basins had to be covered by a groundwater sustainability, one or more, having the basin fully covered by 2017. So at the end, that was largely complied with. I think over 250 agencies have been formed, whole proliferation of new agencies where agencies came together, similar to here, through a joint powers agreement. You have other basins where there's standalone agencies that kept their GSA status, or counties. So it was a real mix across the state on formation. There we go. So process-wise, I won't run through this too much, but sort of the 3 circles is real key. And as I said earlier, one of the unique facets of the law, which, yes, Governor Brown was the governor then, and what happened was, to really kick this off, we had, the last height of the last drought, 2013, 2015 drought, was really rearing its head. I think I'm probably jumping ahead to the next slide where, we're having significant subsidence in the valley, causing a lot of impact to infrastructure, both roads, pipelines, conveyance, flood facilities, as well as thousands of domestic wells that were going dry because of the drought. And it wasn't just the drought. What the drought was exposing was exacerbating some poor management of groundwater in basins. And even basins that relatively were not in bad shape were starting to see that failure to manage basins was starting to slowly creep down outside of droughts, slow decline, and there needed to be something to be done. So in January, the governor proposed in the budget to use, public trust doctrine and go in and manage basins under state authority, which would have been a huge move, but in his message, he said he didn't want to do that. He wanted to have people come together, enact a law, and have it locally done. And one of the foundations in the law is that groundwater is best managed locally, and even the processes that are in the law on state intervention and even the role of the department is vastly different than other state laws. And I've been regulating in the environment and agriculture for over 30 years, and this is a totally different law where the state provides guidance and oversight, but the decisions and discretions are made at the local level. And that is good and bad, because it places a lot of this at the local level that I'll speak to on what our role is to help facilitate that. But the big picture, that Groundwater Sustainability Agency bubble, is really where the action is on implementation, getting the plans together, choosing the path for sustainability for the community. I'll speak to our role. The other bubble at Department of Water Resource has both a regulatory oversight to ensure that local agencies are substantially complying with the law, staying on track, and failure to do so would result in having the State Water Resources Control Board, the other bubble, intervene. And one of the facets of this is it's not a voluntary compliance. It's not something that local agency or basins can avoid doing, they're going to need to find a path under the structure of the law and the regulations to achieve sustainability by either 2040 or 2042. Through oversight by the department, and failure to do that would result in having the state board intervene, which for the state has very limited tools. What the state board can do is they'll impose some large fees to cover their cost, and the only tools they have is to shut off pumping. And the way the law is set up is their role is very limited, and really set up to a point that, once the local agency fixes whatever problems that we identify, the entire control goes back to the local agency. Everyone at the state, DWR, state board, recognize the state can't sustainably manage your basin from Sacramento. The complexity here, you all know, the only way this can be done is through, you all and through local agencies locally, and we can provide assistance and guidance on that. The state cannot manage basins and sustainably. So the other facet is, without getting too wonky, is the law does also change sort of what's typically been looked at in water management on sustainability and creating a sustainable yield. It really places the consideration of how you achieve sustainability on how it affects groundwater uses and users. And this is listed in the law. And it's everything from a domestic well user, ag users, groundwater dependent ecosystems, and anybody that has a need for groundwater. The agencies have to take into consideration where the basin's going to be at 2040 and 2042, evaluate how that affects groundwater users and uses, and if it's undesirable or a significant impact, they need to address that either through, and there's two knobs, either increase what goes into the basin through supply augmentation or demand reduction. It's like your checkbook, trying to balance your checkbook. But again, under the lens of how does it affect and avoid undesirable results for groundwater uses and users. So it was a new lens for water managers to take a look at. There's probably more to that I was going to say. So the dual role we have, one, it is a regulatory role to ensure that there is substantial compliance, that the regulations and the plans are being followed, and not only, and I'll speak to this after plans are approved, they're actually just the starting point of compliance oversight. We're going to be continuously evaluating plan implementation to not decide or cast our values on whether we agree or disagree on the choices local basins are making, but whether you're on track to achieving your sustainability goals by the deadline. So that's sort of a regulatory oversight role. The other facet, and it's probably equally as important, is to provide support and assistance through a variety of means to support sustainability locally. And some of this is facilitation services, some of it's technical support services through well installation, other data sets, and other information, as well as financial assistance, which we've been fortunate enough to have the last number of years through some bonds and now through some general funds. So what's in a plan? A lot of you have probably seen this before or understand what's in a plan, but they're very extensive. And, just experience coming in, putting a plan together and having, like this basin, a lot of previous work that's been done on monitoring and that, it still was a daunting task to pull all this information, to pull under the regulations and law the information together on the basin setting, on looking at that nexus with general plans, how land use plans are actually going to drive future growth and demands. Doing your assessment on groundwater conditions through development of models and other pieces. And then to get to the point, understanding where basin conditions are going to be in 20 years, and then looking through that lens on undesirable results for groundwater uses and users, and developing your sustainable management criteria about where are we going to bring the basin, setting our minimum thresholds to the point that's where undesirable results occur, where you don't want to get to. And then find your measurable objective, where you want the basin to operate, to take into account droughts. This should be the resiliency piece, so when we get to 2040, 2042, taking into consideration climate change, droughts, that you should be able to withstand those wet and dry periods for the long haul. Again, taking 100 years of water law and practices that may not have been done adequately, and changing it is quite the undertaking. And again, the compliance point on whether, you're on track, you're achieving your goals, your trajectory towards sustainability is going to come to us not just in annual reports, which we receive, but also in 5-year interim updates. And this is really the performance point where we're going to take a look at, how are those projects and implementation actions going? Are you walking and doing what you said you were going to do in your plan? And specifically from those monitoring points, this is going to be just compliance points through the representative monitoring wells. Are you on track over your 20-year timeline, your interim measures, on track to achieve your goal? And if you're not, have you adjusted and made modifications, adaptation to your plan to adjust from that? So those are the things we're going to be tracking over time. And again, there's a whole range of basins that can have more than one agency in it and more than one plan, and we have a huge variety of how local agencies decided to take that on. So very busy regulatory slide. And so what happens when we get a plan, and we had basin plans, we had 20 plans that came in during the first round for the critically overdrafted basins. Under the statute, we have 2 years to review those plans for substantial compliance. And I coined that in quotes because that is in the law and in the regulations, substantially compliant with the law, regulations, and guidelines. We review the plans as they were submitted at the time of adoption by the local agency. Once the local agency adopts it, which for here was back in 2020 or probably late 2019, to get it in by the end of January, those plans became operational. Agencies were expected and were authorized to implement those plans upon submission. They don't wait for us to review and approve the plans. It was noted that it would take too much time to wait 2 years, that there was a lot of work ahead. So our plan approval, when we review plans, we have a couple paths. One, we can approve the plan, and as we did here in Indian Wells Valley, based upon what it was submitted, with a number of recommended corrective actions. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about that process in a little bit, but it's also recognized that no plan is perfect. If we held to the standard that every plan had every data gap that was filled, and there's every plan, including the one here, that identified uncertainties, both in the water budgets, monitoring, hydrologic conceptual model, projects and actions, uncertainties, that's a given. It's in the law that that's acceptable. There's also a process that we expect agencies to have a plan to fulfill those over 20 years. Again, this groundwater sustainability plan process is a 20-year implementation horizon. Work needs to start right away, but understanding it's going to take time to fill data gaps, adapt, and adjust those plans over time. So when we look at substantial compliance, it's sort of like, are the pieces there to at least start down the path towards sustainability, knowing at the end, in 20 years, the plan's probably going to look a lot different than what it was when it was submitted in.
So Paul, I'm going to just ask
Sure.
a quick question. So basically what you're saying is that the state came forward and based on this new law, they said, you need to turn in a plan that's going to get your basin to sustainability in 20 years. The thing that we, the state, expect to see in this plan, and then you have like a list of things that are supposed to be in there. And then the state relies on the local agency to make a decision about the adequacy of the data, the choice of the model, the calculations that are used. When that plan comes to the state, then what the state's doing is just going through a check sheet, it's more or less, I don't want to oversimplify it.
It's far more than that.
Yes,
These
that's-
1,000 more pages, staff will go through every section, every attachment, every comment that got received, because those were enormously important for us to get local issues, and even state agencies had issues. We took those into consideration, but you're right. Was the best science used available? Were they in the realm of reasonableness? Were all the pieces covered? And uncertainties, which again, we detail out in a staff report that is posted online. It's in our portal. If you go to Indian Wells Valley, you can see the write-up and evaluation that we did on this plan and every plan. So it does cover that.
And then, so the state then has to rely on the local agency that's submitting the plan when they submit it and they say, yes, we've adopted this and this is the information, the best information we have to offer you. And so that's what you're looking at when you're making a decision.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So the other two steps we have is if we find that plans, are not substantially compliant, we can deem them incomplete. And that incomplete process doesn't stop their implementation. So if they have projects and actions they're taking on, other actions they're taking, a fee, a lot of basins are putting in allocation limits. All those continue even under the incomplete process. What we're identifying is a couple key deficiencies, as we call them, that they missed that preclude us from approving. They're not substantially compliant. I'll speak to that a little bit. They have 180 days under the regulations to remedy those, and if they don't remedy the deficiencies, then the state board will deem the plan inadequate, and then the state board will intervene and go through the state board process. And generally that will start with the board calling a notice, putting the agencies on notice, and really right now trying to work, the intent is probably working with those local agencies for them to remedy the deficiencies as quickly as possible. Otherwise, if it goes on for more than a year, the state board can impose their interim plan, which again would result in the state board imposing fees to recoup their cost, and they would have limited tools other than, limiting pumping and limiting some land use. So again, trying to get this process back to the local agencies. And again, even with that, there's going to be recommended corrective actions, things we're going to look for at certain times from the agencies to come back and improve what their plan is along the lines. And then throughout this, we consult and collaborate with the State Water Board on this as a joint agency process. So again, we had 20 plans, 12 out of the 20 were deemed incomplete. Largely what that happened is and it wasn't about sustainability goals or anything, but largely back to the beginning slide about how you view sustainability, taking into account how your sustainability affects groundwater uses and users. And for a lot of the basins, that was a piece that was lacking. The details explanation of where your basin was going to be in 2040 and how that was going to affect groundwater uses and users was lacking in many cases. There were subsidence issues that were not adequately addressed. There was expectation that subsidence would continue. The law did call for minimizing or eliminating subsidence, and also with groundwater uses, domestic groundwater wells. A lot of agencies indicated that at the end of their implementation period, there was going to be, hundreds and upwards of more domestic wells that were not going to, that were going to go dry because the basin was going to be lower than where a lot of the wells were screened. So we questioned back about, can they justify, the analysis as to why that's not significant and unreasonable, or, come back, either change where your basin's going to operate or try to offset and find some way to mitigate those uses. There were a couple basins that had more than one plan, upwards of 5 plans in a basin with sub-plans in them, and we had issues on the same data, same methodology that was required. So we're working with those agencies, consulting with them. Hopefully by the end of July, they'll respond to us with amendments that will get them to the point of approval. And then the next is the 8 plans that were approved, including Indian Wells Valley. And again, none of these plans are perfect. They're substantially compliant. And what that means is they did cover all the sections that were in the law when it was submitted. So anything that happened after submitted was not part of our evaluation process. We wanted to evaluate whether the plan had the components on all those elements of the plan, including reasonableness on using the same data, knowing that there's uncertainties in data and some data gaps, which was recognized in every plan, that there was at least an indication of the uncertainty there and the ability and recognition that they needed to fill data gaps. And what we were looking at primarily, although we did look at every section and evaluated every section, really looking at the sustainable management criteria. Where they wanted to take the basin, did they evaluate undesirable results for groundwater usage and users to reach sustainability by 2040 or 2042? And for projects and actions, did they have at least a reasonable suite of projects and actions that plausibly could be done? Whether we think they were viable or not, really not our call. That's something, again, under the law, this is a local community decision for the agency to decide the path trajectory on projects, actions locally.
And that would speak to some of the things that members of the audience asked us a little bit earlier. So the people in the audience were asking us, well, what about this pipe or this or that? And that's not a decision the state made. You were relying on the local agency to do that.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's pretty important to kind of understand the context of it. The other thing, too, there are other places, for example, I'm familiar with basins where they knew that the groundwater was going to lower and it was going to impact domestic wells, and they decided it would be cheaper to come in and actually help people drill deeper, just come in and do some deeper wells for people. And that's the decision they made instead of saying, we're going to go find a pipe or do something else.
Right.
And those were just local decisions that were very specific to that community.
Yep, absolutely. And then a couple actions moving forward. We do issue determinations, and there are many basins where there's litigation, similar there's litigation here. Again, we recognize that, we track it, but we focus on what's in the plans, knowing that a lot of the disputes that may result in litigation are local and need to be sorted out locally. And again, recommended corrective actions are things we're going to be looking at as part of our continuous evaluation. And as part of this, again, facilitation is a key component. Some of that information we support. Local actions, again, just touching on our decision, there was a lot of issues whether our decision weighed in either in support or against the replenishment fee or not. It was neutral on that. Again, the specifics on implementation actions, resolutions was after plan submission to us. All we looked at was those listed projects and actions, the trajectory on implementation, whether it was reasonable that they were going to achieve sustainability at the end, knowing that at the end of the day, a lot of these things, there were questions and uncertainties that staff identified that were in our report, knowing that there needed to be a lot of work, adaptation locally, and that's where our assistance comes in to help support that process. So again, either whether we approve the plan or have it deemed incomplete, it has no bearing on the judgment of whether we think, our own judgment as to what choices local agencies are making are the right ones. Because frankly, that from a local agency perspective is the last thing anybody wants, is to have, either DWR or the state board come in and have us impose our value judgments from Sacramento on the choices, decisions, cost, investments you need to make locally to achieve sustainability. That has to happen locally amongst all of you through the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. So again, one of the slides here, and again, these will all be available, as we go through plan approval, and we're going to be in this continuous evaluation process. Approval really isn't the end of the process for us. It's not you get a plan approved and you're good to go and we'll see you in 2040. It really begins a whole new phase where we're going to be expecting, and besides annual reports, the 5-year updates with the interim measures that they need to take. Also, the recommended corrective actions, and there were 7 recommended corrective actions with the approval of Indian Wells that covered everything, recognizing the uncertainty of the water budget, sort of the limited focus on projects and management actions, looking for a broader suite of other options, knowing one project may not happen. We'd like to see what other contingencies agencies would have, as well as community engagement, which was also called out, updating the communication engagement plan. A lot of these are common to many basins, but these were specifically drawn out of Indian Wells. So that's also posted as part of our staff report, and I think consistent with a lot of the comments we had, that we're going to be looking for the involvement and response from the Groundwater Agency on those recommended corrective actions. So as part of that, we're going to continue that oversight of the plans, and we can deem, depending upon response and actions of the agency, the GA over time, we can deem a plan incomplete or inadequate at any time, depending if they're getting off track and not being compliant, which would involve state board intervention. Now, that won't change replenishment fee or other actions the agency takes. Even with state board interaction or our deeming a plan inadequate, doesn't stop local agency implementation. Okay? So, with assistance, which is key because it is something that we are vested in at the department, not just looking at regulating, but really helping communities get to their sustainability goals in a way that's supportive and helpful. So one of the ways that we help is through technical assistance. Some of you probably seen that helicopter taking physical measurements of the geologic architecture, the AAM project, but we also have well installation support. Agencies can petition and ask for that. We come out, we have funding to put in dedicated monitoring wells to help fill data gaps, as well as facilitation support services, and other, also land subsidence data, which we've increased to a quarterly basis because of drought and other needs. Planning assistance, again, guidance documents, we have out facilitation support. Other technical support we have, including translation services, are available. And lastly, funding. You can't do much without funding, especially with the cost and development of plans and actually implementation. So, we've provided funding to local agencies for the development of the plans, which was enormously helpful, and that added to the investment that you've all made through your local agencies on the work that was foundational to the development of the plans. We also have additional funding coming through. We just awarded for implementation roughly $7.6 million to the critically overdrafted basins, including Indian Wells. But we also have other funding coming through the rest of the year. There'll be another $200 million that will be out for solicitation to all subbasins by the end of the year. The governor's proposed another $30 million in addition to that for recharge. And also this week, another $26 million for Sigma implementation. 20 is going to go into that pot, $200 million pot for local agency implementation. Absolutely critical to assist local agencies in addition to their own fee authority. And again, with that, there's other state partners. This is not just our office, State Water Board process coming through. There's a lot of support from Department of Food and Ag through a lot of their programs. Department of Conservation has been absolutely critical in assisting with this effort. There's a multi-benefit land repurposing program that's coming out, upwards of, projected 500,000 to 1 million acres in the San Joaquin Valley may go out of production just because of the lack of water and bringing basins into sustainability. So this will help repurpose those lands, as well as other sustainable projects they have. And lastly, the Governor's Office of Business and Development has been working closely with us to be able to go into communities, and this may be something also to keep in mind for facilitation. They have resources, teams regionally who can go in and work with the community development programs and workforce development programs in assisting transitions as you go through oftentimes very difficult transitions towards sustainability to help through that transition. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Okay, great, thank you. It looks like we have folks lining up, and this gentleman, I told him he could be first. So I will go ahead. Yeah, I'll let you.
Oh, me?
Yes, yeah, I told you you could be first. Yeah.
Hi, so Tyler Montoya again. So I understand, thank you for your presentation, and thanks again for coming out. So the assignment was made through Sigma, but the level of ownership from the Groundwater Authority seems as if it's failed the people who the water is supposed to be for, ultimately. So we understand that there will be data gaps. However, this is it seems like the action plan is much larger than a data gap. So we want to know why it was approved by the DWR.
Are you talking projects and actions or the entire plan?
The GSP.
Okay. The entire plan, according to the law, regulations, and guidelines, covered all the components that were required. And, even if you read the staff write-up, there was acknowledgement about some of the uncertainties, some of the data gaps, some of the ranges of opinions that came in, and that was acknowledged. But at the end of the day, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency is the one that makes the call. And if they're within the realm of using the best data and reasonableness, we defer to the local agencies. Okay, and even with projects and actions and trajectory on how they want to get to sustainability, we may not agree if it was us doing it, we may do it differently, or if we were choosing and looking at water budgets, we may have my staff may have different values or professional judgments on where to fall, but we don't do that. We don't, involve our professional judgment on local agencies on that choice. This is where Sigma did place a very high bar on stakeholder engagement, specifically for this purpose, because these decisions need to be dealt with locally, collaboratively within the community, not from Sacramento, us dictating those choices. You can imagine, you may not like, you may not like what's in there. You may, if the state came in, you may even hate that even worse, which is, from a local agency perspective, you don't want. But it makes it very difficult, too, with a lot of these basins and choices that have to be made. We've heard from a lot of basins on stakeholder engagement on how to bridge that gap with the agency and those choices that were made, people not feeling like they've been heard, not being involved, and that was one of the issues we had, was updating the communication and engagement plan. Again, there were 7 areas we identified for recommended corrective actions, some of those gray area things that we knew a lot of work had to be done. So again, no plan was perfect. When we approve a plan, it doesn't mean it's done, it's perfect, it's kind of not dynamic. We're expecting every plan to be adapted and change over time and probably look a lot different by 2040 than what it did in 2020.
But the local plan still requires DWR approval.
Not the specific actions.
Do you approve of the specific actions that have been listed?
Nope.
Okay, so the DWR does not support the corrective actions that have been listed in the GSP?
No, that's not the question.
No, we have corrective actions, suggested corrective actions. There's going to be continuous oversight, again, on how they're addressing those recommended corrective actions, and are they on track to achieve what they have in their goals for sustainability. How they get there, we don't approve how they get there. Okay, they have, agencies got broad authority, some of the broadest authority in the state to carry this out, and that's at the local discretion. So we're looking at sort of in that local bubble, are they working within the confines and moving towards sustainability, specifically also improving stakeholder engagement, that involvement. So all those recommended corrective actions we're going to be looking at over time. It is, again, for us, and this is probably frustrating, it's a long-term view on sustainability that we're looking at stepwise. I know probably part of the frustration here is a lot of things happened a lot faster than people expected. So, other basins, it's been a lot slower. Down the valley, some basins moved a lot faster because of the drought impacts. But things here moved a lot faster for, again, local choices. We don't dictate the pace other than looking at what they put in their plan for their interim measures every 5 years, which we will check in to see if they're on track.
But the DWR did approve of these action items. And have you read these action items?
We did not specifically approve. We looked at, are there a list of plausible projects that could lead towards sustainability?
And do you feel that these...
We don't approve or weigh values that we think this is a good project to do. Okay? It's sort of like, and if you read our staff report, it's sort of like, these are plausible, there's huge uncertainties on the feasibility, cost, all those things that were issued, those were laid out. We don't know. There's uncertainties there. That's for you all to work out. We don't approve and say, we think this is a good way to go there. We just want to look at, like, is there a laundry list? And even with, the supply augmentation, it was pointed out that that's kind of a high stakes, could work, high cost, a lot of uncertainty, other, we're going to look for other contingencies over time. But that's all going to be for the local agency and the community to choose.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Don Decker again. Thank you for your leading the audience through the Sigma process and much of the detail. I'd like to point out something, though. You described the Sigma process as involving basically state staff and support and management. And most of the effort was going to be under local management and judgment. But there's a third party involved here, and that is California water law, the legal side of it. That's not really local. There's yet a third element. In the very beginning of SGMA, Mr. David Gutierrez was the manager of the SGMA division at the state, and he paid a visit to the Kern County Board of Supervisors very early. And the intention was to have a discussion between the board and Mr. Gutierrez and a couple of his staff members that were also present. We were also, my wife and I and some others from this community were also present. The board asked Mr. Gutierrez how SGMA was going to mesh with existing California water law, and that they hoped that Mr. Gutierrez could provide some guidance and some enlightenment, because there are many areas in SGMA that appear to be in serious conflict with existing California water law. So Mr. Gutierrez, in one sentence, summed up his response was, "We came here hoping that we would learn some aspects of that problem from you folks." So here we are 5 years later, and we still have that as a substantially unresolved area, I would say. I myself was hoping that you might have some additional understanding, and perhaps you do, that you could offer to this basin. Almost all of the early water rights holders in California's basins are being seriously impacted by SGMA in ways that are not positive. And how facilitation or being friends is going to resolve that isn't clear. It's almost an unresolvable problem. I'm making these comments as a citizen of this community, been here for a long time, and have seen the developments that have gone on and the farming expansions that have gone on, and the domestic well pumping too. So a fundamental problem, which has nothing to do with any of the things we've talked about this evening, has to do with growth and how it can truly be managed. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are good points. SGMA's a new law. You're talking about a statute that changed groundwater law that hadn't changed in 100 years since 1914. So it is going to result in a lot of change. And I will say that on water rights and other things, there has been a lot of advancement, bridging that. And in some basins, they actually came up with allocation schemes, fee mechanisms, relationships with surface water, bridging those. Those were done locally, some very tough decisions. Still, there's a lot of litigation going on because water rights are property rights, and they're very complicated. And a lot of times, if you have property right issues, those disputes are handled locally and sometimes through courts. And lastly, on the land use piece, which is a very important piece, land use drives water use. The law does talk about and instruct both the Groundwater Sustainability Agency to take into account general plans and zoning requirements of the municipalities and in the plans adjoining counties and jurisdictions, to take into account land use changes, projections of growth over time. Conversely, the local land use agency, whether it's a municipality or county, and this was amended in the government code, has to take into consideration the groundwater sustainability plan. The idea is that when the land use agency is looking at growth, zoning, and there's a groundwater dependency, they're going to take into account the groundwater sustainability plan. So frankly, there's been a lot of good interaction between the GSAs and land use agencies, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that. And that's something I'm kind of passionate about trying to bridge. So, thank you.
I'm going to be mindful of time, so we're getting towards the end here. We have 3 speakers. We definitely want to hear from you. Are you available to stay?
I'm going to be here as long as people want to talk.
Okay, so we are going to be available after, but we do want to be, if people do need to leave at 8, I know a lot of you have other obligations, so we'll just pay attention to that. Let's take these 3 speakers, then we'll wrap it up, and then we will be available to answer any other questions that you'd like to ask.
Hi, I'm Norman Alexander. I'm representing the Richcrest Area Association of Realtors. Again, thank you for coming out, and I'll be quick. One thing is surprising, like you said, DWR is not really looking at the viability of the plan overall. It just meets certain points, right? That was something new. The other thing I had a question on is, the plan, we had that 25,000 acre feet shortage, correct? And that was part of the plan. Then when you look at the annual reports and you look at the 2020 annual reports, you look over the 5-year average, it works out to be about 7,700 acre feet shortage a year, not 25,000. Given that change, right, and that's real numbers that we're looking at. Given that change, that either means our recharge rate is not correct at 7650. That's really what it means, because we're pulling that out. How does that change the plan itself? The speed of getting the plan done, it has to be implemented by 2040. We're moving at lightning speed, but when you look at the real numbers, it's not 25,000 acre feet per year shortage, it's 7,000. And that does not even include, from the water treatment plant and that. So you can even include that. So that's one question. How do you go look at the plan and make suggestions, or is that just tied locally? The other thing is, big picture, a gentleman got up earlier and said, is there going to be any water anyway? I mean, I'm looking at Lake Mead to find all the gangsters and the barrels down there. Everything's going down, right? And that change is happening. So implementation of a plan, yeah, we can go off and can we get all the money? We're hoping that, because of the base and things like that, we'll get some grants from the government. But again, if there's no water to be bought, so my question from a DWR perspective, are you guys looking nationally? Is there going to be a large plan to get water into California or to the western states in general? And when you start looking at those things, do you go back and reevaluate what everyone is doing? Because that's got to be some discussion going on, hopefully. Thank you again for coming out.
Yeah, thank you. On 2 points, we did identify uncertainties in the water budget that's in there. So that was one of the recommended corrective actions for the agency to go and evaluate and look at some of those uncertainties in the water budget. So what you pointed out, it may fit into some of that uncertainty that we're going to expect some response from the corrective actions at the 5-year update to evaluate from the annual reports and the trajectory on that. So again, this may be part of the discussion through this process with people who have been at this a long time who could help weigh in on some of those analyses.
So it's so it'll be, what, 2020, just 2023 or 2025 before you guys look at it again?
That would be 2025.
So we're going to continue down the road like it's 25,000 acre feet per year when it's really probably about 7,000, and we're going to work a plan. So it comes down to one of the things I like. You did say you do technical assistance to help fill in the gaps, and do you provide funding, or how does that work?
Yeah,
how do we ask for that, I guess?
Again, the funding we provide for implementation can cover the gambit of either projects or actions, or filling data gaps, or doing other analyses. Some agencies are using it for updating some of the information they have. So it can cover anything the agency needs. And I think, back to your point, when we're not expecting, with some of the recommended corrective actions, that agencies are going to sit tight for 5 years and not do anything. We're expecting them to start working on these things, from last January when they were issued, by the time, hopefully earlier than 5 years, and update and improve some of the things we talked about. And maybe out of this process too, a lot of the discussion points relate to that should foster some of the discussion locally. So that's where we're going to expect some actions. And
you will help facilitate some of that discussion?
That's what this is, yeah.
Okay. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you both DWR and Stantec for being here this evening. My name is Don Cordichado, and I have 2 questions that I would like to have addressed. I don't expect you to have answers tonight, but I think they're critical for the Valley to get answers. I'm here as a private citizen who served on the Water District Board of Directors for 16 years, but I do not represent any organization tonight. But with my years of experience, I'm well versed on tonight's subject. The questions that I am presenting have 2 parts. Number 1, why are we discussing importing water? And number 2, should we study building our own water purification plant? The first question concerns the importing of water. Initially, that sounds like a reasonable approach, but when you do your homework, 2 major flaws are reviewed. The first flaw is a tremendous expense to purchase the water, and even more expensive to build the infrastructure to transport the water. We are talking multi-millions of dollars, and that doesn't even take into account the maintenance and upkeep factors. The second flaw is importing water is probably more critical than the first. If, and that is a big if, an agency agrees to sell us water, there's no guarantee that that water will be available if and when we need it. Plus, the selling agency potentially could cite a greater need, and the water might not be available because of that reason. My second question concerns building a water purification plant. I strongly believe that this option needs to be explored. By partnering with the U.S. Navy, who has a major interest in having water available for their employees and our local citizens, we remain in control of our own future. There's a very large amount of brackish water on the base. If we built a desalination plant, we could turn that water back into drinking water. Basically, we create a full cycle of water use and replenishment. To sum up my position, number 1, I am against importing water, and number 2, I'm very much in favor of building a local water purification plant. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think those points are right for the facilitation process.
Yeah.
I forgot when I got up here the first time to thank you both for coming. I'm actually from up north, so I know how far you actually came and how obnoxious that drive can be. So I don't want to set a sour note to end it. However, everybody seems to have been very polite thus far, so I'm going to ask the hard question.
Sure.
That
we're tough.
Well,
I don't. Paul, grab.
It's one that pops up, and for those of us who have been around for a hot minute and watched this process, you mentioned the politics of it, and I do pay attention to it, which is a 2-parter. So when you're talking about Sigma, there is that wonderful phrase, local. Pops up a lot. It's in the law. A lot of questions that I see on social media, interacting with those in my community in Trona, have the same question that those in Ridgecrest have or in Kern have, of if Sigma says that you're supposed to be local, that this is supposed to be locally controlled, how is it that 3 of the 5 members live more than 100 miles away? So I'll stop there and let you answer if possible.
Right. So that's where eligible agencies, wherever their jurisdictional boundaries land, could have, could decide to be, you know, a groundwater sustainability in that portion of the basin where their jurisdiction lies. So just having that footprint in, and if it's an agency, those local elected agencies, then they would have the ability to be a groundwater sustainability agency in that basin. And we've found similar circumstances where other eligible agencies had just sort of a touch point in a basin, and sometimes they were up in, not in another county, but in a foothill area and largely slivers in a basin, and they could have been part of the agency. And so it's one of the facets of the law, you know, for good or for ill.
Well, I'm sure you understand where that question comes from, because if you're going to go with the intent of the law versus what the law says, it's two very different things. So the second part of my question does have to do with Trona itself. As far as I know, and I did spend a substantial amount of time before this, when I got notified about this meeting, I read the 8 GSPs, not in their entirety, because Lord, those are long, but breezed through them, noticed this basin in particular is very unique, where, as far as I can tell, the other 250 or 249, I guess, GSAs do not have to deal with what this one does. They do not have a Trona. They do not have a location that is more than 100 years old that has been doing the processes we've had in place for this long at all. And this is new. Trona had, rather myself and community members held a meeting about the water situation in Trona. DWR was invited. We did not hear a response back, so we moved on with our thing. Not a thing was done, because although DWR's opinion is everybody gets a voice, as some in the audience and myself have actually experienced, that is not the case. Trona didn't get a voice. When the GSP was passed, we couldn't participate in the referendum. When the replenishment fee was passed, we couldn't sign the petitions because we physically don't sit on the basin. Right. There's a hole in the law at that point, and we've asked and we've pushed, and I've made noise, I've made lots of noise, and nothing has been done. It's been 5 years, and nothing has changed. So going forward, that is something that Trona does need, because towns like Trona, and we can't be the only one out there. We are rare, but we're not that rare in this state. Small towns like mine do need protections under SGMA to be able to have a voice, even though we don't physically sit on a basin. Right. Because this is, if you think about it, it's not fair. It's absolutely not fair. So going forward, especially with this facilitation process, with DWR, because this is more of a DWR helping legislative stuff, we've asked Groves, Obernolte, you name it, I've had conferences with them. Nothing has ever happened. So we could, as a town, use DWR support in order to fix these gaps to protect the smaller towns. So thank you, guys.
I agree. You know, no law is perfect. This was, you know, something we're still working through to deal. Unique situations have occurred, and the Trona situation is absolutely a unique sort of situation. It also gets to the point why this needs to be local, but we're working to ensure, you know, Trona's water supply is going to continue for a whole variety of reasons on human right to water and, you know, ensuring water supplies for communities. So, you know, we're working through that to ensure that. But I think back to your point too on engagement, this is something that, you know, many basins we've heard from a whole variety of sectors on the need to have a voice and involvement. And so, you know, outside of funding, we're looking at developing additional tools and incentives and other things to help improve community engagement and voices so they can get heard. Because, you know, the development of the plan and submission is just the very beginning. The most important piece, and this is why right now it's, I think, even the heightened importance, is during this implementation period to have that voice and that involvement. So that's why I think even though some things have happened and wasn't great for a lot of people. There's a lot more to be done over this implementation horizon to 2040. And so we're going to be looking for improving the process, improving some of the statute, the law, and the regulations and guidance we have to improve the process for everybody. So thank you.
So it looks like we do have a caller.
Oh, please, caller.
Caller, please state your name and go ahead.
Hello, this is Renee Westolusk. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm calling because I just want you to know that a lot of the questions you're getting tonight are answered by going to you can go up and look at the Groundwater Authority's website, IWVGA.org, and you can look up meetings going back to, I believe, 2016 even, where there's minutes, etc. And as of January 2018, all the meetings for the Groundwater Authority were videotaped, and there's agendas and there's complete agenda packages with all the documents. You can fast forward through the videos and get to the agenda item you want by looking at the agendas. A lot of the questions you're getting can be answered by taking the time to learn about everything the Groundwater Authority has done. And then I have a question regarding the multi-benefit repurpose thing. There was a bill in the state legislature that passed last year to repurpose, to provide funding for repurposing farmland that would be fallowed. How does our Groundwater Authority apply for those funds? Because we need to repurpose agricultural land in this valley. It's using up too much water, and it's competing with the water needed for the main population that works here to staff the base and do the research and development on the base. Could you expand on that multi-purposing land funding?
Yeah, so that program was put into last year's budget. They got $50 million, Department of Conservation. So if you go to the Department of Conservation site, look under multi-benefit land repurposing program, they have funding guidelines. They had a solicitation that was out beginning of 2022, and they're about to make awards to those applicants that came in to apply. It can be done regionally, so agencies are eligible. There's a whole list of eligible entities who can apply for that, according to the guidelines. I'll also point out the governor proposed in the budget additional funds, I believe $40 million for that program. And there's also discussions as they're going through budget process now that may increase. So I would take a look at the guidelines because there's probably going to be another round of solicitation coming out depending upon how the budget's enacted.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, I think we've gone through the list. We want to make sure, again, that you have an opportunity to get out the door. Don, did you have any kind of wrap-up sort of things that you wanted to?
No, we just mentioned, but I assume there's no problem with putting both presentations on the district's website?
No,
okay,
yeah,
so,
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll put those on the website tomorrow morning, so they'll be available.
That'd be great. And we'll get the contact information and all of that. And then you saw the schedule, so we're going to start jumping in here pretty quick. Once again, I'll work with Paul to come up with the process. We only have budget for 15 interviews, but so if for some reason you're not in that list, I will make sure you have the questions, you have the ability to provide feedback. So with that, I think we should be able to let folks head back into their evening. We are happy to say we really thank you for your time and generosity and spending time with us and providing your input.